Well, what a treat to be back at one of my alma maters. I think it's just great to be able to kick off this Festival of Learning and see some good friends and old faces and also new faces, people who are getting engaged now in thinking through how learning should work, could work, and especially this idea of learning engineering, this idea of how do we make use of what we know from learning and motivation research over the past several decades in very practical ways. I mean, to me, this notion of learning engineering is a parallel to many other engineering disciplines like chemical engineering. If you're building a big pharmaceutical factory, apologies to any chemists in the room, but you don't want your chemists building a giant pharmaceutical factory. They don't really care about regulatory implications and the economics and what kind of metal will hold 1 million gallons of hydrofluoric acid. That's not really what chemists floats their boat every day. They want to do experiments, they work on deep knowledge and careful structures and all of that, not the practical messy trade-offs involved in making something happen in the real world. Yet at the same time, you definitely don't want your chemical engineers working off of, I don't know, the four humors or something like this, right? Ancient medieval science. You expect your chemical engineers are grounding on modern chemistry, and as modern chemistry evolves, that may lead to new solutions, which is terrific, right? That's what you want. What's interesting is we now have decades of learning science, motivation science, other related pieces, social psychology, behavioral economics. There's a whole range of very empirical work that we've done. But we don't really have very many formal ways to create learning engineers. People who are, yes, trained, not on the four humors, but on the science of how learning seems to actually work. And part of what we'll talk about today is it's not necessarily intuitive what the data says about that, but then it's not enough to have read the articles. You got to figure out how to make trade-offs in the real world. And arguably since the mid-1990s, even though we didn't have that language back then, I've been a working learning engineer in all the different environments I've been in. So I'm going to share with you some examples of what this looks like. When you apply learning engineering well, and I'll show some data on this from some of the experiments we did at Kaplan, you can really make material differences. I also have some data, really new data, not even published, from Carnegie Mellon's University that shows some remarkable potential insights that come from real-world use of well-designed learning environments. So we should do that. I mean, shouldn't we? I mean, it's kind of crazy to go back to work and keep using the four humors. I mean, there's stuff to do, right? And you're a room full of people. I assume you're not here by accident and you thought this was going to be EE 101 or something, right? So you are the doers. And so let's talk about this. We'll have a discussion after this. Also, in the break, as we set up the discussion, you guys may want to turn to each other and maybe talk about one thing in what I'm about to talk about that is crazy, or you wildly disagree, or you want to punch me out on, or maybe it's an opportunity, and so you guys pair up. And so think, as I'm talking, I may say some things that seem weird or interesting, make a note, and then you'll have a little conversation there before we then end up with our conversation together, a dialogue. And we'll leave some time at the end of all this so that you can come back and start yelling at me for what I just said. So that would be normal for me. I have a family, right? So it's all good. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at insights that come from learning sciences itself. So a really important piece that is under-talked about is, what is human expertise? How do we actually know what we need our students to become able to decide and do? And we'll see some of the research suggests it's actually non-trivial. So we'll come back to that. Then there's insights about motivation that are, again, not often understood or used by teachers. And in fact, little Bror is not just a lump who slumped sideways and is asleep in class. You're not just one kind of lump. There are specific things that are going on that you might be able to intervene in. And I'm going to show you some research from a very good cognitive scientist, Richard Clark, about that again provides some suggestions for potentially what to do about that. Out of all of this, there are then some real guidelines in detail, screen by screen, across the structure of courses, what are outcomes for how you can design instruction better. So that's learning engineering principles that come from the research. Now, the researchers will look at what I'm about to share with you as some frameworks and say, oh my God, he just destroyed all the nuance. There's no sophistication in this. It's so simple. Does that sound familiar to you engineers in the room talking to scientists? Yeah, there's a lot of that, right? Now, and the engineers come back is, you guys are so impractical. You don't do work that has relevance in the real world, blah, 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 blah. If we only could have that kind of debate around learning, it would feel to me like, okay, now we're in the right place. We're yelling at each other. Good. That means people are there to yell. And right now, there's not so much on the learning engineering side, right? So that's what we want. We want to end up in that same, sometimes tense dialogue between practice and research. And things get tossed back and forth. Problems get tossed back and forth. Results get tossed back and forth. That's where we need to wind up if all of this is going to be successful. So, master's degree in cognitive science in about, 2 minutes. Here we go. MIT, right? We can do this. Okay. So, as an expert, what happens? You have audio and visual inputs coming into your mind. Now, what the cognitive psychologist has found over decades is there's one part that's the first stop for information coming in. It's working memory. And working memory has several key characteristics. Very short retention. Stuff doesn't last there very long. It turns out audio and visuals together, relevant to the topic, are better than just visuals alone or audio alone. It's also, working memory is where your verbal thinking resides. When you have that mental internal monologue, it's all living and looking at the things that are in working memory. What is your conscious mind paying attention to becomes the subject of your internal monologue. Working memory is slow. It's really slow. It's also really error prone. Makes a lot of mistakes, but it is highly flexible. It is the problem-solving part, the creative part, and it's actually also the only entry into learning. Now, if we only had working memory, we wouldn't have much to offer above planaria. We'd be pretty much in trouble all the time, okay? Fortunately, working memory is deeply supported by long-term memory. Long-term memory has very different characteristics. As the name suggests, long retention times, but also an automatic, almost free connection to working memory. So once you have things in long-term memory, whether they are patterns or processes or other things, they take no toll on working memory, which is why an expert looks like a magician sometimes, because they just instantly recognize, oh, your queen's at risk. And my response is, what's a queen? You know, is that what that piece is? And you know, the expert has all this stuff that's just free, which is why they often say, well, it's obvious. And internally, they're frantically thinking, God, why is it obvious? How do I describe this to this lunkhead Bror? I mean, it is obvious, but wait, right? So it's nonverbal, actually. That's the other weird thing about long-term memory. It can do many things at once, very fast, unlike working memory that can only do a few things, it's slow. If it is well trained, which is key, it's almost error-free. Almost error-free, if it's well trained. And finally, it's rigid. Things have to fit in a framework. So all of this sounds kind of weird, so let me make this practical for you. How many of you drive a car? Good, I tried this in Singapore, it didn't work. Okay, so how many of you have experienced the following situation? You set out for place A, and you start thinking about family and MIT and other issues, and you look up and you're in place B instead. Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. Yeah, look around. Okay, so you're not crazy, at least not for that reason. Okay, this happens to lots of people. And I'm usually under-caffeinated, so I ended up at Starbucks or something, and it's like, oh, I did it again. What we don't do is think enough about, well, who drove you to place B? I mean, who was in charge of a ton of metal for 15, 20 minutes at 20, 40, 70 miles an hour? Because you were thinking about vacation planning, right? And now, scary, when you drive home this evening, look left and look right. Who's in charge of those cars, right? It's not who's going to get out at the fender bender, right? And so this is a key characteristic of expert minds. It's not just experts can recognize patterns, it's rather long-term memory can even run for significant lengths of time, complex processing. I mean, I was born knowing how to digest a bagel, okay? Nervous system does it, millions of years of evolution. I was not born with driving in my long-term memory, right? But I can just ignore it and it just happens, right? Until something goes wrong. That's the other thing in this driving model. Driving along, thinking about work, and suddenly a passenger in a car throws open their door right in front of you. You slam on the brakes, and now you're suddenly thinking about driving. Long-term memory, when it gets kicked out of its comfort zone, has immediate access to your attention. You cannot ignore that call when long-term memory says, hey, this isn't what it's supposed to be. And then once you've figured it out and you sort out, what am I going to do? You keep going. Gradually, you hand things back over to long-term memory. So another aspect of this, just to be clear, this is an example of where, yeah, you can have these things work parallel. You can plan your vacation while driving to work. I can assure you, you cannot write a persuasive essay and plan your vacation, right? You can't. So a lot of expertise is not merely sitting in long-term memory. It's like a deep collaboration between working memory and long-term memory. So writing a persuasive essay, there's a ton of stuff that you're drawing from long-term memory. You know, grammar and words and concepts and phrases and all kinds of stuff. But working memory is thinking about, who am I trying to convince? Is the argument well posed? You know, what else do I need to write and so forth? It's a deep collaboration between working memory and long-term memory. So when you think then about top performers, you've got to understand what is in long-term memory, and then also, how does that work with working memory for various decisions? So this, as we'll see, has consequences for instruction. One of the things there's a lot of things about human learning that are exciting, and there's a lot of things that are just frustrating. And one of them is this. Research about human expertise says that that's not a typo, less than 30% of what top performers decide and do is verbally accessible to them. So when they teach, they only talk about sort of less than 30% of what their brains have become able to decide and do, because a lot of stuff in long-term memory is free and is just like obvious, and so they don't think about talking about it. And we're going to come back to this too. This is also one of these issues. This is why so many people, when they move from getting their degrees or their certificates into the world of work, it's terrible. They feel like fools. And they often make the mistake of thinking, it's my fault. I was not designed to be a nurse. I was not set out to be a paralegal, I guess, because here I am. I have the certificate or the degree, and I don't know what I'm doing. I must be at fault. And it's like, no, you were only taught 30% of what you need to decide and do. We'll come back to this. So there are techniques, cognitive task analysis, get you more. They are rarely used because it's expensive and real work. I'm going to show you some actual examples of this and data from this, because I think it's one of the really interesting missing elements for university education, for high school, for corporate training, all kinds of things, is really deeply understanding what top performers decide and do before you begin creating instruction. So we'll talk more about this. Now, we also know a lot about motivation. So motivation in this case, we're looking for results, whether it's practice results, test results, work results, whatever. And we need people to start, persist, and put in mental effort. And this is what researchers think of as motivation, is will you start, will you persist, and will you put in mental effort? You'll notice the word liking is not on this list. Now, that's really important because often people colloquially confuse being motivated to enjoying something. But if you look at lots of professionals, it's not clear all professional musicians love doing the scales. It's not obvious all dancers love the hours spent at the bar, right? It's not obvious that basketball players dig the wind sprints, right? That is not obvious at all. But they do them. They start, they persist, they put in effort because of what they're going to get from it, right? It's not like they're just doing it. They're doing it for a purpose. But enjoyment doesn't have to be there. If you start, persist, and put in mental effort into a well-designed learning environment, you will change your neurons, just like putting that effort into a well-designed physical training program, you will change your muscle cells, right? So a very good cognitive psychologist, Richard Clark, did a survey of behavioral economics, social psychology, motivational psychology, cognitive psychology to try to figure out, are there patterns in what gets in the way of starting, persisting, and putting in mental effort? And so let's walk through these four, and I'll show you what he found. So the first thing that goes wrong is you don't value what you're doing. I'm an engineer in a writing course. I mean, I know this never happens at MIT, but I'm just saying, okay? Where the engineer is thinking, what is the point? I'm an engineer. Why do I need to do all this flowery phrasing and all this? This is just, can't I just think about integration by parts like I'd really love to do, right? It's like, okay, how do you connect, right? Well, you got to make clear to this engineer why writing well is going to change their lives, their careers, allow them to, compete for capital or whatever it is. And, let them use their engineering expertise. So they write about things they love rather than, well, I won't say what they might not love because that would insult both engineers and English faculty, so I won't. But, get them engaged in things that they want to write about. And yes, this is where, is it fun? That helps. That's a reason to get involved. So this is where the liking part can come in. But it doesn't have to be the only thing at all. Second problem, self-efficacy. I can't do this. Another engineer, same English course, I'm not a good writer. I've never been a good writer. It's just, that's not my strength. I'm no good at it. So I don't start, I don't persist, I don't put in mental effort. Well, that's different. So if you bustle over and explain how you'll never become a venture capitalist, nobody will ever fund any of your ideas, you're just making me miserable. That's not the reason why I'm not starting, persisting, putting in mental effort. What you need to do is show that, hey, you've done things like this before. You've gone up learning curves before. Here's what the kinds of things in your world you've done. This is not different. We just need to back up, get started, do the deliberate practice, keep going from there, and even share stories. Other engineers, there's lots of engineers who've become great writers and have benefited hugely from that. Get stories of those people who share the same engineering sense and goals and how they made their changes and transitions, right? So different problem, different treatment. A third thing that goes on is you blame something else in your environment. I can't understand this textbook. My professor hates me. Not Eric. I never thought that you hated me. I mean, no, it was always good. You always asked the best deep questions. How'd that go? Yeah, okay. And a popular problem of all professionals is, I don't have time. Oh, it's valuable. Oh, I can do it. I just don't have time, right? So what do you do there? That's different yet again. You have to problem solve around that. And you also want to demonstrate to the learner that you can problem solve around each of those things. You don't have space. Let's look at where you work. Let's find the space. You don't have time. Let's look at your calendar. Let's talk with other people. Let's shrink down your courses or whatever it is. Let's make time. You want to model, you can solve this problem. You have control over this. It's not out of your control. And you also want to help actually solve that problem. So that's the third thing that goes wrong. Very different than the first two. And the last one is honestly the hardest of all. Negative emotional states, especially COVID. If you are angry, depressed, scared, grieving, so many deaths, it's really hard to start, persist, and put in mental effort into a tough learning challenge. It's just really hard. And what's the solution? Well, it's pretty hard. It's as hard as you think it is, right? Some people, a simple conversation about some problem at home, you can get things going again, but it may go all the way to the need for actual professional resources to be helpful, depending on what the circumstances are, right? But it's a completely different problem than the first three. So you need to be able to diagnose these. More than one of these may be wrong at once, and then the interventions are different for each of them. So this comes out of the research side. So applying all these insights about cognition and about motivation lead to a number of potential guidelines for what you can do, and then I'll show some examples of what can actually happen. So part of it is the deeper understanding of expertise can really help learners, because now when they land in their first job, they won't feel lost. And you know what? They'll tell the students behind them, hey, I'm not lost anymore. Whereas right now, the students tell the other students in the pipeline, it's a disaster out here. I hate my life. And it's like, that is not helpful, right? That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the programs, doesn't help the learners, right? So you want to help learners by getting the real expertise and then discovering, oh my gosh, I'm good at my job on day one, right? Second thing is, yeah, it will improve instructional method choices. How do I teach this type of outcome? And the third thing is, you'll improve outcomes for learners. And you know, that's kind of the name of the game. What are those outcomes and how are we going to improve those? So I'm going to come back to the slide that I laid up before that talks about so much expertise is not verbally accessible. So what do you do about that? What do you do about that? Well, let's take this apart a little bit further. If you think of top performing experts as 100% performance, when you ask them to teach, just like that, maybe MIT does that. Top performing researcher, hey, get up, start teaching. They will typically provide less than 30% of the decisions and tasks that actually their brain does now. And without extra guidance, that's what's going to be left. But there are techniques, cognitive task analysis is the one I'm going to talk about here, you can get another 50% of the way towards what top performers decide and do. There is 20% that so far is still magic, where it's just like, I don't know how he got there, it's kind of amazing. But I'd rather have 80% mastered as a new student going into my job than less than 30%, right? And so what is cognitive task analysis? You do structured interviews with people who are top performers. Now, the interesting thing about that is it turns out people don't even know in organizations who their actual top performers are. See, there's a difference between becoming known as a top performer and actually being a top performer. We all know people who can kind of get their face in front of the camera. You know, it's me, I volunteer, I want to do this, right? When you look at the data, often it's somebody else who in the data is the best performer because they don't want to be disrupted from their work. If they get in front of the cameras or start teaching and all that, they're going to do stuff they hate. They love their work. They obsess about it. They think about it all the time, which is how they become top performers. So you actually need to use data to find them. And that can be its own level of difficulty because often organizations don't even know what data would tell us who is best. I just know Joe is best. It's like, at what? So you actually have to use the data. Once you gather those people together and start to interview them, you work through with them key tasks and decisions, and you use an expert interviewer who's trained to do this, because again, the top performer can't unspool it all. You know it's going well when after about 2 hours, the top performer storms out and says, I can't work with this idiot. Everything is so obvious, and he just keeps asking me about it. It's like, I think we're getting there. This is good, right? That they're relentless about picking through. It's also why it's exhausting for the expert, because this is no longer how their brains work. And so having to keep digging into why and what next, and why next, and why that next, and then what next? Oh, so you do it in 4-hour chunks. It takes weeks to actually get through the expertise. It's expensive. This is part of why people typically don't do it. It has been done in a bunch of areas, but boy, this is not the common practice at MIT, right? I mean, or anywhere else, actually, as a higher education institution. And then lastly, and you only need to interview like 5 to 7 experts, top performers, to get at what is a fuller picture. And because each of them only gives you a 30%, 40% snapshot, you stitch it all together, and then you show it back to them, and you edit it based on their feedback, which lets you zone in on what do all these experts agree is the top performing sets of decisions, and you eliminate some idiosyncratic things that aren't actually what's at the core. And that is what you then use to drive instruction. So here's an example from the work at Kaplan. We had a paralegal training program, a certificate program to get people to become, it was an associate's program in paralegal studies. And so we decided, what is it that paralegals decide and do? So we went out and we found, I think, 4 top performing paralegals, and we interviewed the heck out of them. And what you do when you do these kinds of interviews and synthesize them is you wind up discovering what are their tool skills? What are the kinds of processes they've mastered, the kinds of tools they know how to use, that sort of level of depth. You also find out what do these top performers actually have as prior knowledge. right? And sometimes it's surprising what that knowledge is. It isn't always what is taught. But as a paralegal, you wouldn't be surprised by these topics. That's all fine. But the last and most important part is really then understanding the context of decision making. Under what conditions, the work setting, the places in the process in the work setting, do you need to put together your tool skills with your prior knowledge to deliver a result? And you really do this in great particulate detail if you want to try to get all the way down to the bottom of this. You lay out the sequences of tasks, steps within the tasks for different contexts. It's very much an information kind of theoretic approach to deeply understanding skills. And so, why bother? We've been having paralegal training programs for decades, right? Well, Kaplan used one of the classic best-selling paralegal textbooks as their core for their paralegal associate's degree course. So here's what's shocking. So yes, a bunch of things in that textbook were indeed part of the cognitive task analysis. You can see here 4 of these things were indeed part of what modern paralegals decide and do in the field. But most was not, which meant the paralegals were being sent to work with a majority of their job untrained for. The paralegal textbook had been around for decades. It was the normal way paralegals were trained. And so what happens? You go out there, and a lot of people then just bounce off and decide, I guess I'm not a paralegal. I have the degree, I thought I did well, but clearly my work performance is not good. I gotta leave, I gotta find something else. A few stick with it. And they train themselves, they find mentors, they talk to each other, they give their own deliberate practice to develop these things, they begin to automate fluency, they start to get good at this. After 10 or 15 years, they have now moved lots of what they know into long-term memory, they become faculty, and they again don't teach the next generation most of the stuff. How's that sound? That doesn't sound like a very engineered learning environment, does it? That sounds kind of problematic, right? And so this is where cognitive task analysis can come in to help unpack, wait, what really do top performers decide and do? Now, when you actually do training grounded in a cognitive task analysis, you can get some real-world results. Again, an example from Kaplan. One of the most important roles in the higher education group were the people who found jobs for graduates, especially for associate's degree programs, because the accreditation required demonstrating that students would get jobs, right? So really important to get placements. So, since it was so important, Kaplan said, well, let's do a cognitive task analysis. Who are the very best across hundreds of these placement professionals? And so we did. We interviewed them, we found them by data, we interviewed them, we created a training program, and we got it set up to go. And then we said, let's see if we can see the impact of this thing. So the Kaplan system was set up in like 30 different hubs of placement across the country because there were tens of thousands of students. I mean, that's the advantage of having scale, right? So these 30 different hubs, we randomized them into a treatment group and a control group. And we made sure the control group knew you were going to get the treatment, but just a year later. You were going to get it. Don't panic. Don't feel bad. You're not left out. You'll get it, but we got to delay it for a year. So it's coming to you, to a storefront near you. And then what we did is we looked at the historical placement rates of the treatment and control groups. And what we saw by accident, because it was random, is the treatment group, the ones who were about to be treated, actually just ended up with lower placement rates than the control group. Just random happenstance. It happens, right? So then we did the training program, and then look what happened. Whoa. Now, several things about this. One is significant increase among the training folks, especially when you consider they started lower performing. And they ended up higher performing month after month after month after month. Second thing that's interesting is this demonstrates why you want to do parallel controlled trials as opposed to pre and post. Because everybody got better. Accidents of calendar, the economy, I mean, who knows, right? It's just like life. And yet, this data was very clear to say, yeah, everybody got better. But the treatment folks, they stayed ahead of the control group. This training made a difference. And it turns out in this world, an extra placement or two per month, big deal. big deal. Productivity, but also for students to get them settled earlier and faster and all this kind of thing. So cognitive task analysis followed up by evidence-based training really makes a difference. Now, other things that come out of the research when you dig into it in detail, this is from a really great book. And I'm assuming we can give this presentation out to people so you can see the references. But there's a great book by Ruth Clark and Richard Mayer called E-Learning and the Science of Instruction. Actually, I've got to do this. Who here knows who Richard Mayer is? Raise your hand if you know Richard Mayer. Go ahead, raise it high, raise it high. This is cool. It's like about 10% of you. That's amazingly high. Who here knows who Eric Clapton is? Oh, okay. So who here is a rock guitarist? There's got to be a couple of rock guitarists in every learning engineering group, right? Yeah, okay, there's a couple, okay, right? So notice how many of you know one of the world's most famous and productive rock guitarists and are not rock guitarists. Richard Mayer, by citation, is the world's most cited learning scientist. And a room full of people who are interested, who bothered to come here and haven't left yet, have never heard of him. At least 80%, 90% of you, right? This shows how our ecosystem is broken, right? I mean, you guys know who Richard Feynman is, and I bet you're not a room full of physicists. How could we not know who Richard Mayer is? Oh, off my soapbox. Anyway, Rich Mayer and Ruth Clark have created a series of these books, E-Learning and the Science of Instruction, since 2000. Every 4 years, 5 years, they produce a new one. I think a new one is coming out pretty soon. And they integrate and summarize results in ways that are good for instructional designers. And look at these things. The effect sizes are close to 1 or above 1 standard deviation. They're not expensive. Script audio in a conversational style using first and second person, right? 0.8 standard deviations. Now, let's be clear. These are laboratory studies. These are learning science results. And once you move into the real world, everything always changes. But I'd rather start from here. And just to bludgeon the point, and I know I'm at MIT, bell curve. 50th percentile performance. Move by a standard deviation. 84th percentile performance. Let's review. Right? A whole bunch of things are going to move in laboratory studies from 50th to 84th percentile. And they're not complicated stuff. There's one that's about, move the text connected to a graphic onto the graphic. I mean, this isn't like difficult, but it makes a big difference in terms of managing cognitive load. So there's a bunch of principles like that come out from this. Also, this work on cognitive science learning, the difficulty of loading long-term memory, where you have to keep using working memory to load long-term memory, suggests very practical differences in what your learning environments should be providing. At the beginning, when there's almost nothing in long-term memory, well, you have to give clear information displays. You got to let a learner's visual system begin to stand in for the things that are not in long-term memory. So they can look around. You have graphic organizers, you have visual displays, all that, because it's so confusing. Their brains are just so overwhelmed. Whereas as they begin to get going, now they become more familiar. Now you need new kinds of things. You need more varied practice, more varied conditions. And interestingly, this is the point at which coaching will make the most difference. Because in the declarative stage, you literally have no room in working memory to process the coaching at the same time as you're just trying to remember, what am I supposed to do next, right? So the coaching just bounces off you. It's here in the procedural phase where I'm starting to have a bunch of stuff in long-term memory. It's a little foggy, but now I'm doing some more complicated practice, and now I'm listening to you, and I can actually have headspace to put it together. So in the procedural phase, that's what you want to get to. And then eventually, and some of this will actually have to happen after you leave your instructional environment, you want to be automating certain things. And like I said, not everything gets automated, but you want to automate what you can automate it, because that becomes free and highly accurate as inputs into that noisy, creative problem-solving working memory stuff that you're doing. And this just requires a lot of frequent practice. So where are your learners? And even in the same class, you're going to have learners who are kind of on the bell curve in terms of, are they in a declarative stage, or are they already, because of massive work in high school or whatever, or are they already at the automated stage? In theory, they should have very different kinds of practice if you were trying to optimize where they should come out. Similarly, some work from Carnegie Mellon, a research work from Carnegie Mellon, Ken Kadinger's group, says you got to be careful to note different kinds of learning outcomes need different kinds of instruction if you're trying to optimize how your instruction is going to work. So at the highest level, you're doing some complex cognitive procedure. I don't know, summarize 10 pages of legal information down to 1 page. That's like tough, right? There's a lot involved with that. Well, exactly. There's a bunch of supportive knowledge that goes into that you also need to master, as well as then putting it all together in that procedure. And these are different things. There are facts. There are actually fewer facts experts just know than you might think. And a lot of that is because they end up mastering the essential facts through their work. They don't sit at home and memorize facts on a big piece of white paper. They just keep using stuff in the field, and so it just gets burned in, right? And you can accelerate that by doing things like spaced repetition, but you also need to do the fact recall in work-like contexts. Because, if you learn in a quiet room and you memorize all this stuff about medical terminology, and then you're in a shouty emergency room and people are screaming at you to get the heck over here, that is not the same environment, and so your recall is going to plummet. I'm not saying you want people shouting at you while you learn. I'm just saying you end up needing to practice in environments that are like the task you're going to get at eventually. There's also concepts. There's some famous work by Chi and Glaser looking at students. I think they looked both at high school students and at college students who are very good at mechanics problems. The rolling pins and the inclined planes and the springs. And aside from Dave here, we're all getting nervous and scared for our high school careers and all this. And in fact, the very best problem solvers, the first thing they do is they say, is it an energy problem or a momentum problem? And there are characteristics that you can look for that help you. And it can be obvious, but it can also be non-obvious, where the only thing that distinguishes it is what is the question at the very bottom? Everything else is the same, but the question is the one that turns it into an energy problem or momentum problem. So what is the training for this? It's not enough to memorize something about energy and momentum. You actually have to have practice classifying problems. And top performers get good enough that this is automated. Just like, they can just literally sort a card of decks almost faster than they can speak the words, because they so quickly know what this is. Once you know it's an energy problem, an expert mind then has a framework that pops up out of a long-term memory, which means, they can't not have the framework pop up. It just pops up and starts to tell them what's important and what to do. The only way you're going to get there is practice of that kind. So you've got to do that kind of practice. And then processes. This is another kind of knowledge component. A Krebs cycle or internal combustion engine where you have sequences of things. They have different inputs at different stages. And again, it's not enough to memorize the process. How does an expert use a process? So two different directions. One is I can very quickly, in fact, immediately tell you what will happen if the inputs change. In a Krebs cycle or something like this, if you double the inputs, you might not change the outputs at all because other things are rate limiting, right? But in other cases, you double the inputs, you'll get some change in the outputs because part of it gets used and so forth and so on, right? So experts can do that very quickly. And then experts can also do the reverse, not necessarily so quickly, which is, if I have a defective output, where are the likely problems in the process? Now, that's not as deterministic. So there's more conversation, discussion, trying to figure out what's actually going on there. But they also get very good at that. So again, you need to practice those things. Practice what will happen in a process if I change the inputs and I have these defective outputs. Where should I be looking for what's likely to be wrong with that? And the last thing, which is really a character of top-performing experts, one of the things that's great about bringing an expert into a difficult situation is they seem to know how to navigate in the fog. There's all this stuff happening, and it's very confusing, and what's going on? It's not obvious. It's not like they taught us in school. Well, the expert will typically have something like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but here's where we're going to start. Let's look for this first, right? And you can actually find these. They're principles that help them navigate the fog. It is not enough to memorize the principles. You actually have to navigate fog. And you have to be coached by other experts and by your colleagues, because there's not one size fits all to this, but you get better at it by listening to how others others walked through it. That's why you have grand rounds among medical practitioners, you have charrettes among architects, you have a lot of professionals who get together over a really challenging, foggy situation, and you want to learn how does a top performer navigate through that, and then you want to interrogate them to see, could it be done a different way? Why did you do this? And so forth. That's all part of cementing this. But like I said, it's not enough to do each of these. You get these, but now you need to assemble it together and practice the full procedure. Sometimes in university courses, we spend a lot of time on the knowledge components, and we run out of time to actually put it all together and have them actually do real-world work. And that's hard, because this involves, as you can imagine, a mix of working memory and long-term memory that have to collaborate. That requires practice and feedback as well. Now, another piece of this, some of this you might say, well, a lot of this seems intuitive, right? So I'm going to give you an example from Kaplan. And I assure you, everything I'm showing you from Kaplan, I have a letter from them that says I'm allowed to share this. Okay, you'll see why I say that in a minute. Okay, I'm allowed to share this, just so you know. They're very good that way. They've been very good that way. So LSAT is the law school admissions test. They have these nasty problems that are called logical reasoning problems. I don't know if any of you have taken the LSAT, but they're horrible. They're these complicated questions and complicated stems, logical ifs and that's. And, oh my God, it's head-banging. What that has to do with law, I don't know. But there it is. It's your barrier to get over. Okay. Kaplan's been doing this for decades. They're very good at it. So when multimedia came out, they said, no problem. We will make a professionally produced video and a workbook on the Kaplan way for solving LSAT problems. They created this, they set it up, put it online, our work here is done. Well, a recently trained learning engineer there said, sorry, these LSAT logical reasoning problems, they are cognitive overload for students. Because nobody has ever done these before. They completely wipe out your working memory. The research suggests an approach from a guy in Australia named John Sweller, worked out examples, is a better way to get at these things. So I think we should try those. And this was the beauty of Kaplan, which is instead of saying, everybody loves video, we've already built it, forget it. They said, all right, let's test it. Let's test it. So, 4-part trial. A bunch of students who had no instruction, just got the LSAT problems. Bunch of students who got the high quality, beautifully produced professional video and workbook. And then one group that got 8 worked examples and one group that got 15 worked examples. So nobody knew how many worked examples to give. 4-part. Okay, 4 parts. So here's the first result. Now, as an instructional organization, you never want to see a result that appears to suggest that with the training and learning, you do worse. Now, I'm not a marketing guy, okay? But I don't think worse than nothing is going to be helpful. Now, the great news using mathematics and statistics is, hey, it is as good as nothing. Is my branding working yet? Would you guys pay money for that? No, it's not. We're not where we want to be. Right? Now you know why I got a letter from Kaplan to say, can I show this, okay? But then, these were the worked examples. The 8 and the 15, and it turns out both of them were significantly better than nothing, and then the media one. So that's terrific. I mean, there you go. Learning science, win. But there's a second piece. Professionally produced video and workbook. Cost. 8 worked examples was literally 8 PowerPoint slides marked up by an expert. 10-fold, 20-fold difference in production costs. So as a business, we had their attention, right? I mean, you're solving a business problem with learning engineering, which is a key lever to make learning engineering work in the real world. For any of you who ever get interested in the real world, that's a key thing. I mean, that's how you get people to listen. But then there's the third thing. Look at the amount of time it took to complete. More than 90 minutes to do the professionally produced workbook and video. 8 minutes to do the 8 PowerPoint slides. So wait, let's review. It worked better, cost 1/10, and took less than 1/10 of the time. But video is so great. I mean, isn't video great? And this kind of back and forth happens all the time in the real world, where people do not want to give up on their intuitions. But one of the reasons I stayed at Kaplan so long is this result caused them to say, wait, we now can no longer rely on our intuitions to design instruction. If there is evidence, we must follow the evidence. We cannot simply use our intuitions, unless we're forced. I mean, engineers always, you end up using your intuitions, but you want to be guided by evidence, so you're not having to draw a very long line. You're trying to draw little short lines instead. So our intuitions just don't work that well. So more use of learning science principles really does help. We did at Kaplan University, which is a virtual university, they had been doing fairly traditional kinds of courses that were kind of read, write, discuss. You know, and they'd have a discussion board thing, they'd have some general assessment rubrics. There was kind of an indifferent connection between the stated objectives and the course outcome and the course material, because faculty often know what they want to teach. And then if you force them, they'll come up with the outcomes. And you know, that's how a lot of instruction works. Not at MIT, of course. I mean, Eric and, you know, no, not at MIT. But I mean, in many places, that's how it actually works. Well, so what we did was we threw the learning engineering kitchen sink at a bunch of different courses. And so we rewrote them with their specialists to be prepare, practice, and perform. So we had the outcomes and the content aligned. We started with the outcomes. There was one lesson per objective. And if you needed to combine objectives, that became its own lesson. We had demonstrations and worked examples, practice and feedback before the assessments. And the assessments were not trick. They were similar to the practice and related to actual work tasks. And I won't go through it all, but we also then had monitoring and support for motivation. We gave teachers indications of which students were falling off the pace so that they could intervene directly. And then we did a randomized controlled trial, because Kaplan University had 30,000 students a year, and they had courses starting every month. So they could literally, and by the time I left, they had done like 120 different randomized controlled trials over a period of 2 or 3 years. And so this was one of the things that they then tested, was to say, what actually happens? And what you saw was, in terms of student success, which was defined as a student passes the course, a student masters the critical learning outcomes. So the faculty had picked out, there were certain outcomes that were absolutely critical. And the third thing is, the students came back. I mean, Kaplan University is more like a community college kind of environment. Lives are busy, people have families. So one of the biggest challenges is, will they come back semester after semester? So that was an important piece of the success. And yes, this was an amazing success, 1.6 times more successful after this instructional redesign. It has a real impact. And this was with 900 students. This was at some scale between these different courses, right? So you can actually make a real difference. Another aspect of this that's actually important is, what tools are we giving to teachers and faculty? And have we tested those too? Because we often sort of just pitch things to faculty and assume they can use them and assume it'll be fine and whatever. But you know, we should pay the same respect for their tools as we've just talked about for students. So again, at Kaplan, Kaplan University, we were trying to come up with dashboards for the faculty. We'd actually tried some commercial analytics that claimed to predict outcomes. And the data was good in brick and mortar classrooms, but when we did randomized controlled trials, we did a bunch of them. There was no iteration on which faculty did better by using those commercial tools compared to their own instincts or whatever they were using before. So we gave up on them. And we said, let's go look at making our own tools. So we created a dashboard around attendance, a dashboard around learning management system minutes, so how much work, and a dashboard around the number of assignments that were handed in kind of in a complete way, by different time intervals. And then we said, which of these works? So fascinating thing. So this graphs retention of students, that thing about will they come back, retention, which is really important. And what you can see is, and it's true, statistically significantly, the attendance monitor and the number of assignments monitor both gave significant data to teachers that they were able to act on. Not so much learning management system minutes. But then when we added academic performance, learning outcomes, it turned out LMS minutes was actually helpful for that, whereas attendance was not. And the only one of these dashboards that helped with both was the number of assignments. Now, this is real engineering in the sense that you couldn't predict that ahead of time. You actually had to put this in the field and try it, and very likely there was more to be learned in terms of, well, why was that, and what else is going on, and et cetera, et cetera. But the point of putting in the field and checking was to discover, hey, let's get them started at a number of assignments right now, and then we'll keep going from there to try to improve things further. The thing I'm going to end with is, as I said, really fresh results from Carnegie Mellon University that are actually quite fascinating. This is from Ken Kadinger's team there. It draws on large real-world data sets in DataShop, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And it shows a startling regularity that is really worth scratching our heads over. So DataShop includes very granular data from online course modules about how many practice opportunities did students get, how did they do on those, and you can literally graph learning curves, right? The classic learning curve is the more practice opportunities you have, the better you are, but you start to have diminishing returns, et cetera. And so they had all that data. And they had dozens of these courses, and you can see in the number of observations, the number of students, some of them had more than 100,000, a lot of them had tens of thousands, thousands of students. This is at scale work in the field. This is not in the basement laboratory stuff. This is the real stuff. All of these courses were ones that had been tweaked to have really good learning curves, because they could actually diagnose a bad learning outcome because it didn't have a normal learning curve. It just looked stupid. So they would go in and try some things and figure it out, and they discovered that outcome was actually 3 outcomes. You separated those outcomes, and each of them had a nice learning curve. So you say, okay, that's better, right? So they had a whole diagnostic iteration, and these are courses that had gone through that. So they were good learning environments from that standpoint. So here's the thing that's just stunning. These are graphs of individual students and their learning performance rates graphed by the number of opportunities they saw. Now, you'll notice that these are lines, and that's because the data for percent correct has been transformed with a log odds ratio transformation, which makes these things into linear things rather than the curvy things that they usually are. So the first thing you'll notice is, wow, people start at very different points on that left-hand side. Some people start almost fully accomplished, and some people, wow, they got a lot of work to do, right? Now, the reason Ken got interested in this to begin with was, hey, let's find the students with the fastest learning rates, especially among students who start at the bottom, right? Because then we'll go study them and understand, how do you do what you do? And then maybe we can teach other kids to do what you do, right? These are parallel. These are parallel, okay? What does that mean? Well, it means a bunch of things. One, these are well-designed learning environments, right? This wouldn't be true in a badly designed learning environment. But in a well-designed learning environment, this happened over, and the article is great. Again, you'll get this reference, you can see it. Happened over and over again. These things were parallel, right? In a well-designed learning environment, you will learn with each practice opportunity. And the practice opportunities were good. They were good, deliberate practice opportunities. You had to react to feedback, and then you'd come back, et cetera. They were good practice opportunities. So good learning environments, you will learn at the same rate. The second thing about this, though, is you've got to be motivated. Remember that thing I talked about, motivation, right? And if you stop too soon, you won't achieve the performance you need. But what this suggests is you're just chunking away at it. You will achieve high performance if you keep going. So suddenly motivation becomes critical. Both faculty to recognize this isn't a slow student, this is just a student who needs a lot of practice opportunities, and for the student. And in fact, some of their, I don't think it's published, but some of their data suggests some demographic groups give up too soon, and other demographic groups starting at the same place just keep chunking along. They just keep going. And this data says that's what's making the difference, right? But the third thing is structural, which is do our learning environments give learners enough time to execute enough practice opportunities? Remember, this is not time down below. This is practice opportunities. So are we arbitrarily limiting the ability of people who come in who don't have pre-existing expertise? Are we arbitrarily limiting their dreams by not giving them enough time? When this, and they're beating up on it, they're trying to figure it out, they're trying all kinds of things to make sure this is right. If this is right, then really, high levels can be achieved by all learners if they're given access to well-designed instruction and motivation for enough practice opportunities. Now, this at a high qualitative level has been known for years and talked about for years. What's fascinating here is, look at this data. I mean, this is not a no kidding, let's let the slow learners feel good about their slow performance. This is saying, no, that's absolutely the wrong way to think about this. Everyone is learning at the same rate. It's just a question of where do they start if you have a well-designed learning environment. So now, I think we're ready to start moving maybe into our discussion and conversation. And one of the things, if you don't already have a question, is do you think MIT learning environments are well-designed learning environments that would allow every learner with enough opportunities to learn to achieve at high levels? Thank you very much for your time.